So my screen is visible to you?
Yes, yes.
Okay, fine. So 2 minutes over. Okay, fine. So this was the last topic that we were discussing about, and as it was left in between, so we are going to discuss it again. And I'm going to finally talk about on the main point. I think you have understood that why do we need the Banker's algorithm. First point that if there is a single instance of each resource type, then there is no need of Banker's algorithm to avoid the deadlock. You just simply see the resource allocation graph. If there is a cycle, then obviously you should understand that there is a possibility of deadlock, means there is a deadlock. And if there are multiple instances of different resource type, then you are supposed to take Banker's algorithm into account. So we are moving forward with the data structure. There are different data structures, typically different sorts of means multidimensional metrics, or you can say arrays are there. So available means showing the current availability of the respective resources. Then there is a max, means the maximum number of resources needed by the respective processes. Then allocation. Allocation means the number of resources those have been already allotted to the different existing processes. And finally, there is a need matrix, means showing the current need, means the amount of more resources and different sort of processes do need. So finally, moving forward, that it was the resource request algorithm that if some process makes a request, okay, so that request is supposed to get processed. So it will get processed in this particular manner. Firstly, you will check whether the means the put forward request is less than or equal to the need of that particular process. Then if it is true, then move to second point. Otherwise, raise an error condition, because no process can ask for more resources than its requirement. Second step is that if the request is authentic, then is it less than or equal to the available resources? If it is less than or equal to the available resources, then obviously you can provide it. But if it is more, then obviously you can't. Then in that condition, you don't need to raise some sort of error condition, because that is not some sort of ingenuine case. Obviously it can be a kind of genuine case, because there might be the situation that process is supposed to need more number of resources, but currently available resources are less in number. So that's why what you need to do, you just supposed to wait. So wait for a random period of time. As soon as the resources become available, they will get allotted to you. In the third step, when the resources, means the request is authentic and it can be availed by the process because the available resources are more, then what you need to do? Firstly, you need to deduct it from the available pool of resources. Then you need to increase the allotted resources of that particular process. And finally, you need to reduce the current need of that particular process by the amount of resources that have been already requested. So finally, moving towards the example, we considered an example of having three types of resources, in which we have type A resource having 10 instances, type B resource having 5 instances, type C resource having 7 instances. Okay. Then at a particular moment time T0, T0, we are supposed to have these different matrices, allocation, max, and the available. So obviously you can calculate the need matrix out of these matrices. What you need to do, you just suppose only need to take the max matrix and the allotted matrix, and then you just perform a subtraction operation. So max minus allocation equal to your need matrix of different processes. So in this way, you can see that for process P1, sorry, P0, we need to have 6 instances of resource type A, 4 instances of resource type B, and 3 instances of resource type C more. Okay. Similar fashion, for P1, it is supposed to be 1 instance of resource type A, 2 instances of resource type B, and 2 instances of resource type C. Then moving forward, it is 6 instances of resource type A, 0 instances for B, and 0 for C. Then for P3, 0 for A, 1 for B, 1 for C. Then for P4, it's 4 for A, 3 for B, and 1 for C. So in this way, the available resources of different resource types are 3 instances of A, 3 of B, and 2 of C. So we calculated the need matrix of different processes, and what we got something like this. Okay, that we just discussed. And what is our available? So our available is 332, I think. Yes, 332. Okay. So if 332 is the available matrix, means available resources of different resource types, then you see in which particular fashion you can execute these processes so that the demands of all processes could be fulfilled. Okay, so you have 332 means, okay, you guys tell me, what is the possible schedule so that the system doesn't go into a deadlock? Firstly, tell me, is there any possible schedule? Means, is there any possibility that we can allocate the resources to all the processes and it doesn't go into deadlock?
Yes.
Yeah, sure.
I think there is. I tried writing the table, and I think there is.
Okay. So tell me, firstly, we have 3 available resources of ABC respectively. So we have 332. So compare from P0. 332. Obviously, we cannot satisfy the demand of P0. Then for P1, can be satisfied 332? Yeah, we can. Because 332, in each category of resources, we have more number of resources, we have more number of instances than required by P1. 332 are available and 122 is needed by P1. Okay, so what do you need to do? Means need is authentic and the available resources are more. What do you need to do then? You just need to perform the third step. Which third step? See here. We discussed here that if first point, if the request is authentic, means less than its need. Second, is it viable? Means can be fulfilled. Yes, 332 is more than the need of P1. Then what we need to do? Perform the third step. Means reduce the available resources first, then add the allocated resources, then reduce the need. Okay, you cannot alter or you can exchange, you can't exchange the steps, okay, because it will put an impact on the final overall allotment process of the system. Because if you first reduce the need, and suppose just after execution of this instruction only, there is some sort of system fault or means your system crashed. So in that particular situation, your request vector got deducted, but your allocated and available vectors were not updated. So when the system will resume, then there might be a chance of unstable conditions. In this means if there are multiple parties inside a system and they are maintaining their own state of system, then there will be a state of confusion if there is no synchronization. So that's why firstly you need to reduce the available resources, then increase allocated, then reduce the need. And obviously in this kind of situation will not happen in the system because there is always a kind of concept of rollback. Means system automatically rollbacks to the stable condition if some sort of faults come into the system during the execution of some sort of event. Okay, so finally you just need to focus on to one point only. What is the point? That need should be authentic, it should be viable, and finally these 3 sub-steps. Okay, so come here. We have 332, so we can execute. We can give resources to P1. So 332, in this way, it will get fulfilled. After the execution of P1, these resources will also become available to the available pool because P1 will complete its function. So it will return its resources. Once the P1 will return its resources, what will be the amount of available resources? Firstly, so don't go into a means complex kind of mathematical operations or whatsoever you call. Okay, because it's a very simple concept. firstly, what you need to do? Firstly, you need to provide the required resources to P1. So suppose if the required resources means if these required needed resources are provided to P1, then P1 will again return these needed resources to available pool. So you don't first give the available from available to P1, then again take back from P1 to available pool. So what you need to do, just forget about this. Okay, because obviously for its execution, P1 needs these many resources, but you don't need to think about it. What you need to think about? You need to think about allocated. Why I'm saying so? I'm saying so because if you are deducting the amount that is required by P1 from available, so it is allotted to P1 now. Then after its execution, you will return back all the resources to available. Means what you deducted from here will again come back here. So you don't need to first deduct and then add. Forget about the need. What you need to do, you just add this amount of resources to this amount of available resources. So after P1 execution, what will be the total available resources? It will be 5 instances of A, 3 instances of B, and 2 instances of C. Understood what I am saying? Everyone? Anyone has the confusion? Okay, fine. So what you need to do, add these resources to the available resources. Now the available resources are 5, 3, 2. And what is the need? After P1 is out of the requirement list now. Okay, means it doesn't need any more resources, but it is already completed. Now see here. Five, two, two. Sorry, what is this? 5, 3, 2. Yes. Okay. So after 5, 3, 2, 5, 3, 2, you cannot complete the requirement of P0. 5, 3, 2, not 5, 3, 2. Yes. You can complete the requirement of P3 by the resources available, that is 5, 3, 2. Okay. So the available resource vector is 5, 3, 2, and the requirement is 0, 1, 1. So now allot the resources to P3, and after its execution, it will return back all its resources to available pool. So go to P3. Here, P3 already allotted resources is 2, 1, 1. So 5, 3, 2 now will become 7, 4, 3. Because the allotted resources will also become available after its execution. So 7, earlier it was like means the available vector was 5, 3, 2. Now 5, 2, 7, 3, 1, 4, and 2, 1, 3. Okay, so it is 7, 4, 3. So in this fashion, 7, 4, 3 and P1 and P3 are already executed. So 7, 4, 3, you can directly execute the demand of P0. 7, 4, 3 available and 7, 4, 3 is the requirement. So P0, if you give the resources to P0, then its current allocation is 0, 1, 0. So 7, 4, 3 will become 7, 5, 3. Okay, 7, 5, 3. Then 7, 5, 3 is the available vector, and P0, P1, and P3 are already executed. So 7, 5, 3. 7, 5, 3, you can take the requirement of P2 or P4, anything. So in this fashion, you can perform, means either this one or this one. So okay, we take this one, 7, 5, 3. Then P2. 7, 5, 3. Then add 7, 3, 10, 5, 0, 5, 3, 2, 5. So 10, 5, 5. And finally, the requirement of P4 because it only existed there. Okay. So 10, 5, 5, then 10, 5, 5 means 10, 5, 7. So after the execution of all these processes, the available resources will means the amount of different resources available in terms of instances will be equal to the initial instance, that is 10, 5, 7. Okay, so in this fashion, all the requirements of different sorts of processes will get completed. So we will declare that the system is in a safe state because we found a suitable sequence. What is the sequence? This sequence is the safe sequence. Safe sequence means what? Safe sequence means that if you execute the processes in this particular order, okay, then all the requirements can be fulfilled. Those were raised by different sort of processes. Okay, without getting into a state of deadlock, you can satisfy the requirements of all the processes. Then if you find any sort of sequence which doesn't trap you into a state of deadlock, that will be called a safe sequence. So here, this safe sequence might be different for person to person because I executed first what? I executed first P1. Then suppose after P1, I executed some other P4 or something like that. That one, if some process is feasible like that. Okay. So for example, I executed the requirement of, I think, P4 in the last, but you can see that this particular sequence executed the requirement of P0 in the last. So it depends on the choice of user. Okay, if you are a particular user, then you may choose any particular process to execute first. But the only condition is that the request should be feasible. Second, it should be viable. And finally, you need to perform the means reduction of available resources, then increment of allotted resources and reduction of need. So by performing the 3 steps of the resource allocation algorithm, you can find this safe sequence. Okay, and this safe sequence might be different for person to person. So that was the last point from yesterday lecture. Sorry, day before yesterday lecture. If you have any sort of question, then you can ask. Anyone?
Professor?
Yeah.
I had a doubt with respect to the scheduling section. So last time you talked about shortest remaining time first, and we drew the Gantt chart and all.
Yes.
So what if there is an equality between expressions? I mean, suppose both require equal time, but both have equal remaining time. How does it decide?
Same sort of thing. Like here, you have a choice. Okay. Similar fashion, there also you have a choice. Means if there is no associated priority, because if there is some sort of a priority available there, obviously then you can't choose anyone. But if there is no associated priority, then obviously it's your choice. It's the user's choice.
Yeah, but if it's a processor which is, the OS which is choosing it, then which one will the OS choose?
It will choose depending on the underlying criteria. As I told you that any scheduling algorithm works on some sort of criteria. So if your criteria is very vague, means your criteria is that it's only depending on the shortest job. So if the shortest remaining time, okay, and your shortest remaining time first algorithm says that whatever is the minimal time that should be executed first. So in this definition, 2 processes lie. So if 2 processes lie in the same criteria, then obviously it's your choice. Means random assignment will be there. So obviously, like here you can see, according to the algorithm of resource allocation, there are multiple sort of safe sequences possible. Here, what we did, I gave the example and I chose P4 in the last. And we also got the safe sequence. And according to this sequence also, you can get the safe sequence. Means this is also a feasible safe sequence. You can execute P1 first, then P3, then P4. So after having the 7, 4, 3 resources, we had 3 choices. Either we can execute P0 first, then P2 first, or P4 first. We chose P0, but what this particular pattern chose? It chose P4. Then it chose P2. But we chose P0 first, then we chose P2, and then we chose P4. So point is that here the criteria of this selection is that the requirement should be less than the available number of resources. So that's why these three processes lie in the same criteria. Similarly, if we choose the shortest remaining time first, and there are two or multiple processes having the same remaining time, then obviously it's up to the user. Means OS will choose any job randomly out of that particular pool, having the minimum response time. Sorry, minimum remaining time, not response time. Any other doubt? Archit?
No, not from my side.
Okay. Okay, guys. Anyone else? From this particular lecture, you have any sort of doubt, then please let me know. Okay, fine. So, I'm going to share today's lecture slide. Is it visible?
Yes.
Okay. So, in this particular lecture, we are going to focus on the memory management unit. What is the role of memory management unit in the specific memory management task by a particular operating system? Then what is the concept of swapping? And finally, the memory allocation. The first part means the basic introductory part of this particular focus. The common objective is that we are going to understand the underlying mechanism of MMU, that is memory management unit. What are the different constituent elements? Those are supposed to work in a seamless fashion so that you get the minimum response time from memory. And then we are going to discuss the concept of swapping. What is the concept of swap in, swap out? Means what is the concept of roll in, roll out? And then what is the difference among all these terms? Okay. Then we are going to discuss about the memory allocation. Why do we need the memory allocation algorithm? So what is the benefits of respective algorithms? Then why do we need to prefer one over another, and kind of different questions. Finally, we are going to exchange few words. Okay. Fine. So discussing the very basic concept of MMU, you can see this particular figure, and here you can see that there is a main memory, means that is RAM, and shown in green area. And then there is a hybrid kind of module that lies in RAM and device area, and that is called IOMMU, means input output MMU. And there is a single MMU that lies between the virtual address space and the physical address space. Okay, so then there is a device and CPU. So considering this particular figure, there might be some basic questions in your mind that why do we need two MMUs? Additionally, what is the concept of MMU? Why do we need to have the mapping sort of concept from physical to virtual or virtual to physical? So we will discuss all these questions one by one. First question, that what is memory management? So memory management, okay, you guys tell me in the introductory 4 lectures, I told in detail that why do we need memory management? So any one of you can give me the importance or the critical need of efficient memory management in the system. Anyone? Priyam, you are there? Hello. Okay, am I audible?
Yes, Professor. He might be having some internet issues.
Okay, no issue. So what we are going to discuss that why memory management is important. First point that everything is going to get saved in memory. Okay, and to execute anything, you need to bring it into main memory because the memories are of different types. You have cache, you have registers, you have main memory, you have disk, then you have your magnetic tapes also for very large memory storage at cheap rate. So point is that according to the requirement of different programs and feasibility, you are supposed to execute different versions of data in different memory locations. If the data is of no speed concern and then the data nature is very large in nature, means in amount, then what do you need to do? Just to simply store on the magnetic tape and put in some cupboard. Okay, forget whenever it's required, just take it out and play. Second type of storage means you need some sort of immediate need in comparison to magnetic tape, and you don't want to put in some sort of cupboard or something like that. It should be ready in your system. So put inside this. But if you want to run anything, then definitely you need to put into RAM. But if you need more frequent access, put into cache. If you need much more frequent access, then put into register. But each memory is different in terms of cost and speed. So that's why there are some financial constraints also. So you cannot have the same amount of memory at different levels. So that's why first thing, plan your storage. Whenever you want to do some sort of storage inside your system or outside your system, just plan your concept. Means how frequent do I need this particular content? Okay, and then according to your requirement, you can save it at different locations. So first thing, doesn't matter wherever you save your content, you need to access it, because ultimately, why do we store information? We store information or data because we do know that in future we need this particular content, or there might be a chance that we are supposed to find out or explore different contents of the stored data. So that's why we need an efficient mechanism so that whenever it is required, our data should be available to the audience or to us. So that's why there is a need of efficient memory management. It should not be like this that you dump your data somewhere inside the corner of your disk, and when you wanted to search it, it's nowhere. Means you are just searching, but there is no kind of clue of your data existence. Many times it happens that because nowadays it has become a frequent problem, that instead of having the direct means besides having the direct access to the content, we also need the efficient naming mechanism. Nomenclature should be very strong because there have been enormous data. Means we have come across the situation of big data. There are so much large amount of data available across the world. Means you need the Google accounts, your Microsoft accounts, and all these. And on those also you have TV data, and you have your hard disk. And then means if you have the payment-based services, then using cloud you have TB of storage online. Then you have TB of storage offline, and then you are maintaining at least a GB of storage on your system. So kind of having this large amount of information, and then you have different sorts of file types. You have Word files, you have audio files, you have video files, you have music files. So in this fashion, point is, if you want to find a particular file, then you always come across in situation, means especially I come across. I don't know about others, but it happens with me frequently that I forgot. Means where I have stored this particular information. That what am I supposed to do? I was supposed to do that I need to find some sort of efficient searching algorithm. I need to search my content in the best possible way. So that's why there is a search option in the window. You can use that, or you can run different dedicated search utilities. But point is that ultimately, when you forget that where you have stored your content, you need a efficient and strong search mechanism. So what memory management does, it does these sorts of activities that it helps to search your data. Additionally, it helps to bring the data from the intended location to RAM. So here, computer hardware components handling the different sorts of memory operations are performed under the umbrella of memory management. Why I'm calling it an umbrella? Because there are different sorts of activities those happen, or those all those activities take place behind the scene when we do perform lots of interactive processes in front. In front means at the front of your system, because there are some foreground applications, there are some background applications. So when you are working with the foreground application, lots of memory activities are happening. You might be thinking, no, we are not storing anything anywhere. Then where the actually this sort of all memory management or whatever we are talking about, where it's happening? Because doesn't matter whether you are saving something or not, but you are doing something means it is in RAM. If it is in RAM, then to bring the something to processor, you need to fetch from RAM also. Then there are some very frequent data elements. Those are supposed to get stored inside registers. Then those are supposed to be fetched from registers. So every time processor is fetching something, means it is trying to get something from either hard disk or from RAM or from registers. Memory management is the ultimate unit that is responsible to give the data from memory locations to processor. And after its execution, memory management unit is responsible to again save the data back at the respective locations or at the intended location designated by processor. So point is that memory management unit becomes very or highly crucial in importance. So that's why we need to maintain a very safe state of memory management. So to do it, there is a dedicated hardware unit inside your system that is called memory management unit, kind of chip. Okay. So why do we need it? So in simple terms, if we try to say, then we need a mapping from virtual addresses to physical addresses. Virtual address is what? Virtual address means the logical address. Now, what is a logical address? So logical address means the address which is generated by CPU. Some sort of relocatable address. Relocatable means which address can be adjusted at any location with respect to a base location. For example, I want to ask your house number. What is your address? So you gave me your house number. Okay, I want to send a letter to you. So you only gave your house number, that my house number is 303. Okay, so 303 is your house number, and I don't know what is your street number, what is your pin code, or what is your locality. Then obviously I'm not supposed, I'm not in a situation to send a letter to you. Specifically, even if I send, there is no guarantee that it will reach to you. So point is that if you don't have a proper mechanism to send data or letter from one position or one location to another location, then what is the benefit of your memory or this message management system? All these message or kind of memory management system come into picture to have the efficient communication possible, or the efficient memory or data location possible. Or the is different with respect to the available memory management unit. So here our address that we considered 303. It logically it is true. Means you told me your house number. Means absolutely fine. Your house number is 303 only. But when I asked you your address, I didn't mean only your house number. I wanted to ask your gully number also, means what is the locality and what are the surroundings, what are the related milestones or something like that. Means I want to have a complete address so that I could communicate to you. But if you provided 303 and you said fine. Now same thing, that processor generated a address which is fine, is supposed to be a address length of a memory location, but it is not particular to a specific location. Now you tell me that how the memory management unit will get to know the exact address of that particular location. So memory management unit is supposed to take the logical address, then take that logical address, add it with some base address, and then need to go to that particular location. For example, you told me your 303 house number. Then I will try to find somehow your locality, your city, and then I will try to dispatch the message to you. So similar fashion, you can see that the role of memory management lies in the mapping from virtual, means the logical addresses, to physical addresses. So here you can see that we are trying to map the virtual address to physical location. So here in this figure, there are device addresses, means related to the devices input output. Then there are virtual addresses. Virtual addresses means all the addresses generated by CPU. So there is a dedicated memory management unit which is supposed to take care of the mapping from virtual addresses to physical address. Means you need to convert the addresses generated by CPU to an actual address form that is supposed to be accepted by main memory. Okay. Now, what is this? This is input-output memory management unit. Same sort of concept. The only difference is that here you don't have the logical addresses. Here you have the device address. Now, device addresses will try, means for example, some device is trying to access content from memory. Then your input-output memory management scheme will try to convert this address provided by input-output device to the physical memory. Okay. So we are not supposed to bother about this particular concept. We are supposed to bother about this particular concept. Why? Because input-output devices are supposed to vary in number. Input-output devices might or might not be present in some system, but definitely if some device is supposed to be called as computer or system, that definitely it is having some sort of intelligent component like CPU. Means processing is must. Okay. Whether taking input or giving output is required or not, but processing is must inside a system or computer. So that's why, and additionally, once you understand this concept, by default, you will get the notion of this concept also. Okay, so our focus is this one. So here, another question, that what is physical address, what is logical address? I think I have told in detail. Okay, the addresses generated by CPU are called the logical addresses, and once the base addresses or the local addresses are added with respect to the generated logical addresses, these become the physical addresses. So in layman term, what we can say that the physical addresses are the real addresses of main memory, and the logical addresses are the relocatable addresses generated by CPU. Fine. So finally, what is the difference between logical address space and physical address space? Space means what? Space is a constituent assembly of multiple same sort of entities. So here, if we add all the physical addresses, add means if we collect or if we assemble, or what we say, if we represent all physical addresses in a form of set, then we will say that it is physical address space. In the same fashion, logical address space is the collection of all logical addresses that can be generated by the particular CPU or processor. Fine. Moving forward. Now we have understood the concept that why do we need memory management strategy? Why do we need a dedicated unit to take the care of this particular task, that is memory management? Now we are saying repeatedly that memory management means it is supposed to take care of your data access as well as its storage. So definitely you are supposed to bind your data to your particular memory location. Means it can't be a situation that you have generated a data but you never stored it somewhere. Obviously, doesn't matter whether you have not a storage or have stored in disk, but definitely it is going to get stored somewhere in your RAM because you are working on it. Okay, so temporarily or whatsoever you call, but for a fraction of time, definitely it will lie in your RAM because you are working on it. So you are supposed to bind the data to memory. So here you see what is before understanding this concept, because inside this we are going to discuss about three things: what is compile time, what is load time, what is execution time. So first thing that you are supposed to take a brief idea that what do we mean by a program execution, because when we execute a program, normally we come across all these terms, that it is the compilation program. Now the program is getting executed. So what exactly happens behind the scene? So the behind picture is shown here in the form of a flowchart. Okay. So if you have a source program, then first thing that your source program will take care sorry, one minute. Yes, now. So your source program will get through a compiler or assembler, and the time taken to get it compiled will be the compile time. Then you will have the object module. Object module means the object code. Like after compiling a C program, you get the .obj file. Okay, so some sort of object module you get kind of it supposed to be kind of relocatable code, but will not call it relocatable because relocatable code gets generated after loading. So here it's a kind of relocatable of source only. Now, as we know that only source is not capable to get run directly on machine. Why? Can anybody give me this particular answer? Can we directly run only source code without help of any system library files or something like that? Anybody?
Professor, I had one small doubt for that.
Yeah.
So what is source code actually? Is it the code that the user is providing or the code that the machine recognizes?
Source code means source code is always provided by user, because ultimately if it is recognized by machine, then machine will directly recognize it and will execute it. Then there is no need of any other process. Okay, so
Okay,
source
so
code
in that,
means what the
yeah.
user has written in the form of some programming language or something like that.
Okay, so in that case, it needs to be converted into assembly or binary or something like that. So that's why we need
Yeah.
only source code is not enough.
Yes. So only source code is not enough, because ultimately, for example, even if you have written in say your assembly machine, then there should be underlying architecture that converts your assembly into machine code. Ultimately, machine understands binary 0, 1. Okay. So here you see that some sort of compiler or assembler is needed. In addition to this, your source code, you are supposed to add some other modules. What are these other modules? Means, for example, your source code is depending on some other function. Then where that particular function is stored. So all those functions, all those modules are supposed to be binded with your program, means your source code. So all the linking will happen here. After getting the required linking, then there is a load module concept. Means now you are supposed to load your module into your particular main memory. So here all the system library files will come into picture. System library files means when you write a C program, I hope all of you are familiar with C at least. Okay. So when you run a C program, then there are some header files. So all those header files are supposed to be added with your source code, means your object module, and your loader will load all these contents together into main memory. Because once your program comes into main memory, it will start executing. But for execution, your program needs some sort of header files. For example, inside your system, inside your program, you have written printf, scanf, or some commands to give an output or take input. So all those commands are not written by you. You are directly using the functions. So those function definitions are stored in header file. That's why all those header file contents are supposed to be loaded at the time of execution. So loader will load all the content into main memory. Then dynamically, some of the content will be required at runtime, because while executing some content at runtime also we do need some content. For example, some user input or some sort of library. For example, you are using some specific function of a particular program. You are playing a game and suddenly you need a dedicated function which is stored in a runtime library. For example, if you have seen a gaming skin, then definitely there are lots of functions. Why I'm taking example of a game? Because in a game, obviously there are so many controls that all the controls are not possible to load at a single time if your system is not powerful. Okay, so if you take a particular functionality, means you are taking some sort of ammunition or something like that, then that particular ammunition function is not available to you in the starting itself. Once you take it, once you opt for it, that particular content might be loaded dynamically in runtime into your RAM. So that is your dynamically loaded system. Okay, and it is called dynamic linking. So it will happen at execution time, means your program is running here. So you can see that from source to run time, all these things happen. First you compile, then you add the related modules, then you link all the modules, then you load it. After loading, you add some related system files, and finally at the runtime, you add the dynamically required files called the dynamic link libraries in Windows .dll files. Okay, so here when we say compile time means what? Compile time means that if you know the memory location in advance, then only we can call it compile time. For example, you have asked for a particular function that is already stored in a memory location, and compiler knows in advance that this particular function is called in the source code. So it will take care of all these activities in advance. Means at compile time, all the memory locations required to fetch content from are already known. So memory locations are known a priori. A priori means in advance. Okay, before the actual execution. Then absolute code can be generated. Absolute code means with respect to source code, whatever code is generated, that is called absolute code, means as it is, its object file. Then you need to must recompile the code. Every time you need to recompile your code whenever you do some sort of modification in your source code. Obviously, that's a fundamental requirement. If you have changed your source code itself, then obviously you need to compile the program again. But if you have not changed the code of source itself, then you don't need to compile, you just simply need to run it. For example, when you bring some exe file or you play some gaming DVD or CD, then you don't need to compile it. You simply run it. So why we don't need to compile it? Because we have not changed any source content. Source is already defined by the programmer, the gamer. Now that particular game content writer has already written the code, has converted into a exe form. Now what you are doing, you are just simply downloading the game or playing the CD and simply running it. Okay, so it doesn't matter how many times you want to run it, you can simply run it. You don't need to go through the compilation process. Okay, then second is the load time. What is load time? Means the time, here you can see it is the load time. The time that is supposed to be driven to execute the content of the object module with respect to linking, and then the time that is incurred in loading different sorts of modules, those are available in the memory, and some of the in the form of system library. So simply in layman term, again you can call that the time incurred in loading activity is load time. And whose function is it? Loader function. So the time incurred by loader is load time. Simple definition, if you don't want to go into detail. Okay, then what is the condition? That the memory location is not known at compile time, but obviously after compilation at load time, we do need that what are the required system libraries. For example, the .h, the header files, kind of, their location is not known at compile time, but at loading time, obviously the loader knows where it is, means where the memory contents are supposed to be fetched from. Okay. Finally, there is an execution time. So execution time means this particular time. So here you can see that only you are supposed to find the related DLL files, dynamic link library files. So here binding delayed until runtime. Binding delayed until runtime. Here you are adding these files. And if the process can be moved from its execution, if your process is such in nature that you can move from one location to another during execution, then only you can have the concept of DLL files. Because if there is some program that doesn't allow for runtime linking, then obviously you cannot have any sort of DLL file. And finally, last point, that you need the hardware support for address mapping. Hardware support means some sort of registers are required. Those are supposed to relocate you to the actual location. Now, again and again, I'm bringing these terms into discussion: relocatable or memory management or register or the addresses. What are these all things? Those who don't know, you will get a clear-cut idea now. In this lecture, all these things will become clear. Don't worry. So, first point, logical and physical address space. As I already told you guys, that the concept of logical address space is bound to the aggregation of all logical addresses. And what is a logical address? A logical address is the addresses generated by the CPU, also called virtual address. Okay. Similarly, physical address space is the collection of all physical addresses, means the addresses generated by memory unit. Which memory unit? The memory management unit, MM. Okay. Then logical and physical addresses are the same in compile time and load time. Okay, but they are not same in execution time. Understood this particular point? The logical and physical addresses are same in compile time and load time, but they are not same in execution time binding. Here you can see. In compile time and in load time, the system is not accessing any physical address, because physical addresses are only accessed at runtime. Because repeatedly, I have told you multiple times that whenever some program is running, it is in main memory. Okay, so until you come across the situation, until you come across the state of execution, you are in logical space. Once you have entered the state of execution, now you are in main memory, means RAM. Okay, so all these activities are before entering into RAM, the compile time and load time. After this state, you enter into RAM, means execution. So once you have not entered into RAM, how you can get the physical addresses? Definitely not. So all these things means all the addresses generated at compile time or load time are just plain logical addresses. So here, this second and third point, the logical and physical addresses are same, means what? Means both are logical addresses. Okay, but at runtime, the logical and the physical addresses are different. How these are supposed to be different, that you'll see. Don't worry. Okay, so using these two basic hardware support mechanisms, you are supposed to access your memory in a convenient fashion. Now I'm saying these are two hardware support mechanisms. Why? Because these are two registers. Okay, there is a base register inside your system. It is supposed to be named as something else, or means it is just for layman understanding. They have named it like base or limit. But obviously inside system, names might be different. For example, the address of next location is supposed to be handled by program counter, not by some random register. Okay, so similarly, there might be some other register taking limit, but the concept is this, that one base register is there, one limit register is there. Okay, now here you can see, suppose if there are three processes in your system, and obviously inside RAM your OS will be there. Okay, so there are three processes in your system. This is vacant space, and this space is held by P1, P2, P3. So you can see what is the address space of P2. The address space of P2 is defined by a base register, means by its value, and then by a limit register. So if you add the content of limit register with base register, then you can get the final limit of this process address space. Did you get what I speak? You can see here that if we add the limit register value with the base register value, then you can find the end location address of process P2 address space. It is P1, we assumed, okay? It is P1, it is P2, it is P3. Suppose it is like this. Then what is the base value of P2? It's this. Then in this particular value, okay, if you add, it is 3,40,000, okay, something. So then if you add here this 1,20,900 into this, then obviously what is the last register value? That is 4,20,940. Okay, similar fashion, here the details are given that the pair of base and limit registers define the logical address space. Logical address space of what? Logical address space of the particular process. So with respect to each process, there is a base register and there is a limit register. Okay, and these values will get stored in PCB, obviously. Okay, so there in PCB, the related information. Now, for every memory access that is supposed to be in user mode. Why we are saying user mode? Because user will only generate the processes. Okay, there might be some system process, but we are considering only user processes right now. So make sure that it is between the respective base and limit for that particular. What this line means? This line means that whatever instruction, for example, you have created a process and you are trying to have a memory access through that particular process. So that particular memory access should lie between the address space boundaries of that particular process only. If this particular process is trying to access a memory location, then it should not go before this location and after this location. All the memory access means all the memory requests should be with respect to the addresses lying within this range. Why? Because P2 address space is this much only. You cannot go beyond or before your address space boundaries. Okay. Each process is restricted to its address space. Now we are moving forward and we are discussing the concept of address mapping. We already have discussed that there is a concept of physical address and logical address. So see here how the logical addresses are converted into physical addresses. See, there is a CPU, obviously means the processing element. All the addresses generated by CPU are called what? Logical addresses. Yeah. So all the addresses generated by CPU are logical address. So this address is logical address. Now, logical address, you need to check, okay, that if it is greater than or equal to your base value. Okay. If it is yes, then okay, fine. Means now here there might be confusion that base value might be greater or might be lower than this particular value. You might be assuming now, you might be considering what if the limit value is greater than the lower than this particular base value, but it is not the comparison between these two values. It is the comparison with respect to this particular address space. See, if it is the base value and it is the end value, then if we are trying to access, for example, processor is searching for a particular memory location, then it will search from here. Means if the sequential memory execution is in picture, then it will start from 0. It will come across this, then it will come across this, then it will find the base value. Now it will see that address space, that it is the base and it is the end. So now here you see that if the address generated by CPU is greater than the base value, means you are going beyond the base, but you should not go beyond the base plus limit. Okay, then only you can get to the actual physical location. If either you are before the base limit or you are trying to go beyond the base plus limit, then in both conditions you are supposed to send an interrupt signal. This trap is an interrupt signal. Okay, so you are supposed to send a trap signal to operating system that there is an addressing error. Now the addressing error might be it might be intentional or non-intentional. For example, if you have provided the wrong data to CPU, then CPU generated a wrong address. Then in that particular case, it is non-intentional. But if somebody is deliberately trying through processor to access a particular memory location, then this security check will not allow you to go or enter into the address space of another process, because processor, this memory management protection mechanism, this address mapping is supposed to be bounded by these security checks, that whether you are trying to access the right memory space area or not. If you are going with respect to the right base and limit values, then only you will go to the memory location else there will be a signal to operating system. Fine. So address mapping from logical to physical. Obviously, it is the obvious choice. We are always supposed to bind the logical addresses to physical addresses. Means if you generate some address and we are supposed to go to physical address. Yes, physical address. Now, is the reverse possible? Means, is there a need of physical to logical address map? Is it needed? Anybody? Can we have a scenario having this sort of requirement? Physical to logical address map.
If we need to use the process again, if another process
you want
requires
to use
this,
the process again, then the
As in-
process values are stored in memory. This memory is main memory, and main memory means what? All the processes are here. So if you want to access the memory, then you don't need to go to CPU. You can access from here. So this sort of feasibility is not in the picture. You are not supposed to map physical to logical. You are only supposed to map logical. Clear? Finally, the concept of security. So we have seen already that we have maintained the security mechanism with the help of these two boundary checks. One is with respect to base value and one is with respect to base plus limit. Okay. Hope it's clear. So moving forward, in short, if you want to define MMU, means memory management unit, then what it is exactly. Now see the figure, read these 2 points and tell me that what exactly a memory management unit is.
it maps logical addresses to physical addresses by assigning a relocation.
Yes. So did you understand the concept of relocation? See, in the last figure, what we saw here, we saw that the CPU address generated by CPU means the logical addresses. Now, these logical address should be greater than the base. This particular condition, why we are saying this particular address that is coming from CPU is not this address. It is this particular address. Okay, now it is the physical address. So if it is the physical address, then only we are checking these boundary limits. Now you are getting the concept of what I am trying to deliver. Point is that this address that is coming from this side, the addresses generated by CPU are logical in nature. But what this particular address is, this is the address that is coming from CPU after relocation calculation. Because it is obvious that if this is the situation, then your 346 is never going to be greater than the base value. You are getting the point. Your 346 is never going to be greater than the base value. Then your address will get denied. Address request will get denied here itself. This particular address is the complete address. Okay. The logical address, normally the addresses coming from CPU are called logical address. Okay. But just as I think we should have discussed this figure first. Okay. So if you don't understand, let me tell you. What happens? Addresses generated by CPU are called the logical address. Okay. Once a logical address is generated, it is added with relocation register value. This relocation register gives the base value. This base value gets added with 346, it becomes 1400 346. Okay. Now here, It is the complete address after relocation. It is coming from CPU only, but it is coming after relocation. Okay. So now you are checking that is it greater than base? Yes, obviously, because we have already added the content of base with the help of relocation. Then is it within the limit? Yes. Then only you are allowed to access memory location with respect to the process whose base value is already added, in the form of relocation register. Because how you will get to know that a particular request is with respect to that particular process. It will be done with respect to the base value. Okay, so this address will be mapped that is this particular address greater than this? Yes. So allow it with respect to the process having 14,000 base value. But it should be less than the base plus limit value. So for example, consider the limit of 500. So 14,346 should be less than the 14,500. Yes, so it is authentic. So you are granted. So it is the whole idea of memory management, means the basic idea of memory management. And here what we are trying to do, here we are trying to have the security mechanism. Means the request doesn't go into the address space of another process. Okay. Now the user program deals with the logical addresses, but it never sees the real physical address. What does it mean? Can anybody tell me the meaning of the second part? The user program deals with logical addresses, but never sees the real physical address. Anyone?
Is it because the MMU sort of passes in, is an intermediate between the values?
Yeah.
The user program only sees what the MMU gives it.
Perfect. Because the user is not bothered about the mapping process. When you run a program, when you watch a movie, when you store something inside your system, do you bother about that where my program is stored actually, at what particular memory location address my program is stored? No, never. Because we are supposed to just make things function. We don't bother about the technical details. So a user program, even though you are a technical programmer, like see here, in this particular program, when you write the source program, do you bother that where your program is supposed to get loaded? No. We wrote the program, we gave to compiler, and we forgot. After compilation, we'll simply give the command of execution and we'll enjoy. Okay. So despite being a technical person, we are not supposed to get bothered about the memory allocation and all those things, because those things are supposed to be taken care by processor or the operating system. Okay. So here, what we are trying to convey the message that your memory that is supposed to be accessed by a particular user program is not visible to user. User only see this particular address. For example, you tried to jump onto a particular location. Then you gave the address or the pointer value of that particular function or subroutine. That maximum you can do. But in actual, where this address is going to get translated and mapped to, that you are not supposed to get bothered, because memory is very large and you are not in a state to remember all the address. Okay. Moving forward. So there is a concept of static and dynamic loading. Static loading means what? First thing, the choice. So choice means when do we decide that we are supposed to have the static loading or dynamic loading? So at the time of program development, means when we write the program, means at the time of source code writing. This gets decided that these things will get loaded at a static time, means at the compile time, and these things will get loaded at dynamic, means at runtime. So there are some static loading, means the absolute program, and the data means the things that you have explicitly mentioned in your source code. For example, you have mentioned the pointer or the actual address of some particular function or subroutine in your C program. Okay, so you made a call with respect to a pointer. Then you have mentioned the address, you have mentioned some location. Then all those things will get explicitly loaded at static time, means at compile time only. But there are some of the things, those are not predefined by user. Then those things are supposed to get loaded at runtime. Okay, so the only difference, if the user knows about anything and mentions about it in the source code itself, then all those things are supposed to get loaded at compile time, and that is called static loading. And all the remaining things which are not supposed to be defined by user, those are supposed to get loaded at the dynamic time, means those are supposed to be get loaded at execution time, supposed to be called dynamic loading. Okay, so dynamic loading of the library is stored on a disk in relocatable form. Relocatable form means after loader, the addresses generated by loader, those are called the relocatable addresses. Relocatable addresses kind of logical addresses. Here, again and again, you need to come across this figure because this is the basic figure. So after loader, you get the relocatable code. Relocatable code here, these modules can get stored in memory anywhere. So here you have the CPU logical addresses up to here. We have already discussed that at compile time and at load time, we only have the logical addresses. We don't have the physical addresses. So once you add the logical addresses with respect to the base value with the help of relocation register, then you get the physical addresses. And we have seen here. See, with the help of relocation register, you will add the logical address and will get the physical address. And before accessing memory, if you want to have a security mechanism, then you are supposed to put this sort of security mechanism that no process should attempt to access the another process address. Okay. So I think the static and dynamic loading is clear. Now dynamic loading. In this, there are some specific points. First point, that routine is not loaded until it's called. What does this mean? Means anybody would like to explain why we don't allow all the routines to get loaded until the routines are called. Routine means function or the subroutine or whatsoever you want to call it. Anybody? While discussing this concept, always maintain an image of a program compilation, program source writing, its compilation and its execution. So when you write a C program, do you include all the routines into memory? If you need something, for example, you need printf function, you need a scanf function, means commands for input and output. Then you give explicitly those commands in the system. Then those parts are supposed to get loaded at compile time. Okay. But at runtime, suppose I gave the example of that you are playing a game. Do you know in advance that according to at this particular time moment, I am going to use this particular weapon or I am going to use this particular power or something like that? Can you decide in advance what is going to get in real time or in execution time? No. Nobody knows what will happen in real time. In execution time means runtime, means real time. In real time, in execution time, you don't have a single idea that you are supposed to have this particular kind of function at this particular kind of location with respect to this particular kind of problem. In a game that is highly random, if you are playing some sort of very common game in which all the tracks are already defined or the situations are predefined, or you have played it already and you have a kind of idea that after this location, this particular kind of problem will come. I will fetch this particular function. I will try to get over it. Okay, then it's fine. Then you know some sort of activity. But still, until you reach that particular moment, for example, you are playing the stage at stage 3 of a particular game. Okay, and you don't need the function that is required in stage 3, then that function will not get loaded into memory in stage 1 and stage 2. Why? Because we don't want to misuse our memory. Because our memory is precious. Because if you load the functionality that is required in stage 3 of a game in stage 1 or 2 only, then what will happen? That you cannot add the other functionalities. Those might be needed in stage 1 and stage 2. Means you are collecting the things, those are useless right now. Why not to import the things which are required at the defined time only? So processor does this only. Because if you include all the functionalities since the start only, then your program will become heavier. Your system will lag. You will not get a good response time. Your system or your machine might pause, or it may give you kind of delay. You might be seeing that if you are running some heavy game, then your system might be giving you some sort of random delays. Your system screen is getting freezed for some moment of time. It happens because there is a pure scheduling of resources. Or it might be that you are running a heavy game on a low power system. So point is that all the routines are not loaded at the start of program because those are not needed. So what is the choice? The choice is simple, that load the programs or the routines which are required at the time of need. So that's why dynamic loading comes into picture. You cannot load all the programs in advance. Only at the time of call you will load all the programs. What will be the benefit? Obviously, better memory utilization. Better memory utilization with respect to the unsaved routines. Okay. Third point, that it is useful. Why useful? Dynamic loading, because the large amount of code is needed to handle. Then you are supposed to take the pages from memory disk to RAM and kind of. Means you will understand the concept of this third point in the next lecture, because we are going to discuss the concept of paging there. So paging divides the large amount of code or the program into multiple pages, and then you bring the required paging. Okay. So it happens, infrequently it happens, but it happens that we do need the large amount of code or big programs. Then we are supposed to take care of dynamic loading. Okay. Lastly, no special support from the operating system is required. Why? Because program design is made in such a fashion. If you are supposed to have the dynamic loading concept, means your OS already has that particular kind of feature, or means your programming language, sorry, not OS. If your programming language allows dynamic loading, okay, then your OS will definitely provide that functionality, because no additional function is required. What it needs to do, it just need to do the logical to physical address mapping. Because when we are saying dynamic loading means what? The things are getting loaded into RAM in a dynamic fashion. Dynamic fashion means randomly. You don't know in advance. Okay, so randomly things will come into RAM. It means what? The logical addresses will get mapped into physical address randomly. Okay, randomly doesn't mean inaccurate. Randomly, but accurately. All these things you should have. Okay. So, static and dynamic linking. The concept of static and dynamic linking, we have already discussed the concept of loading, but we have not discussed the concept of linking. So let me tell you that static linking, like static loading and dynamic loading, there is a concept of static linking and dynamic linking. Okay, because as we have seen the concept of loader, similarly there is a concept of linker. Okay, so in runtime we dynamically link the things, but the things those have already been linked at compile time or at load time, those are called static linking. Okay, so the linker combines all the modules needed by a program, means we know in advance. Obviously, the resultant single executable file is created, and there is no runtime dependency in static linking because everything is predefined. Okay, but in dynamic linking, similar to dynamic loading, here it is dynamic linking. Loader means you are loading into RAM, that is loader function. Linking means at runtime linking all the components to your main executable file, that is linker. Okay, so dynamic linking performs linking at runtime. It is not required to link the actual modules with the program. Okay, in advance. In advance, I forgot to write there. Okay, not required to link the actual modules or library with the program in advance. Then dynamic linking uses a reference. A reference means kind of pointer to the dynamic module, because if you want to add something at runtime, then obviously you need some sort of address now. And how you will provide the address to CPU or something? Then obviously you need a variable. That variable is called pointer, because pointer is a variable that holds a particular address. Okay, fine. And the example of dynamic linking is dynamic link libraries. Those are available in Windows. In C directory, you can go, and inside C directory means in your C drive, you go into bin folder or some sort of system folder like program or program 32. Okay, and inside that, if you try to find some of the system files, then inside go deep, and finally you will find the DLL files. Lots of DLL files are there in C. Simply go to C drive and Control F, find. Okay, search for .dll. You will find lots of DLL files. Similarly, the concept of shared object is present in Unix-based systems. Okay, so now our focus, though we have discussed the static and dynamic linking as well as loading, but our focus is on dynamic linking and dynamic loading only. Why? Because static linking loading are not critical to system performance, because those are defined a priori. Means before runtime only, all the things are already done. Though your compiler might take 2-3 seconds or sometime more in linking, okay, or in loading, but your runtime will be same. But if you have dynamic linking or loading, then your runtime will differ, because there might be some problem at a particular moment while linking the file in runtime. Your system memory is working fine now, but it might happen that tomorrow your memory is not giving the same performance. Tomorrow some sort of error came due to some memory overlap or some dangling pointer or something like that. Okay, so that's why dynamic cases are more important, because those are complex to manage, but they give more performance benefits, as we have seen. Okay. Now, with respect to dynamic linking, linking is postponed until execution time, very well known already. Okay. Then the small piece of code called stub. We have already discussed the concept of stub long before. Okay. But again, tell you that the concept of stub is that it's a small piece of code that takes care of some small activity. That is called stub. There it was taking care of sockets. When we discussed, that is used to locate the memory resident library programs in an appropriate fashion. And then it replaces itself with the address of the routine. Means it is working kind of pointer. It is supposed to point to the required location, and then it will again replace the address of that particular location with that particular variable. When you write a C program, you define the variable in terms of pointer. But when you run it, what does that happen? Means what happens? The thing that happens is that the pointer variable is replaced with the original address. That is the case now, because at machine level, the pointer variable will not get recognized. Only the memory location addresses will get recognized. So pointer variable will get replaced with actual address and will get executed. Okay. Finally, operating systems need to check if the routine is in process memory address space or not. Means the same concept that we discussed in security check. Whether the memory location that you are trying, means the process is trying to access, is within the base and base plus limit of that particular process. Means whether the requested address lie within the address space of that particular process or not. If it is, then okay. If not, raise an error condition. Now, dynamic linking is particularly useful for libraries. Why? Because we have lots of libraries. It is not possible to add all the libraries in advance at static time, means at compile time. So dynamic linking is particularly useful when you have lots of libraries, because if you add all the header files, all the libraries while writing the program only, your program will become so heavy that it will take means a multitude of its original compile time. So much compile time will get means the process compile time will get wasted. So just to save the compile time, we only add the header files or the libraries which are ultimately required at in advance, means at compile time. But if you need some of the random libraries, those are not supposed to be sure that these are supposed to get used or not. Those are supposed to be used at dynamic link time. So that's why don't define all the libraries at compile time. Leave most of them for runtime. So dynamic linking will take care of all these. And in some systems, the dynamic libraries are also known as shared libraries, like in Unix. Okay, we have already discussed this point in last slide. So here the concept of swapping comes. What is the concept of swapping? Concept of swapping tells us that if we want to stop one process and we want to resume another process, okay, then we are supposed to take the new process into RAM and we need to swap out the process that is existing inside RAM. Means it is the condition when your RAM is full of processes. Will not leave a RAM empty. Why? Because leaving your RAM empty means what? You have 8 GB of RAM, you have 16 GB of RAM. Nowadays, what happens? People go for system purchase, then they look how much RAM is there, 16 GB, 18 GB. But do we actually need that much RAM? If you have bought a system, then make a proper use of it. If you are not having a right degree of multi-program, means you are not running multiple programs simultaneously, then what is the need of 8 GB, 10 GB, 16 GB RAM? No use. You just need a 2 GB RAM system. If you don't have heavy processing programs or you don't have the right degree of multi-program. Okay, so that's why nowadays programs have become heavier. Lots of heavy games and applications are there. That's why heavy RAM systems are required. But if you don't play games and all these things, the heavy things, then don't go for heavy systems. Those are not required. Okay, so swapping means your RAM is full and there is something that you want to run. Then first you need to bring something out, then only you can put something in. So that's why swapping means it's the exchange of data with respect to RAM and disk. So here you can see that it is your backing store, that is disk. Okay, and you are supposed to swap a process out first from RAM main memory to disk, and then you can fetch the other process from disk to RAM. Okay, now you will say that why it is needed. So it is needed because it might be the case that P2 is of higher priority than P1. Okay, there is some other process that is more critical in execution. So you are supposed to bring it in and you are supposed to bring it out. Now this particular process, which process to put out, means which process to swap out. So it will depend on the criteria of priority. Okay, so it is system dependent. Now there is a concept of backing store. So what is backing store? It is your disk only. Okay, and it should be large enough to accommodate all the copies of your all users. Then there is a concept of rollout, roll in, same like swap out and swap in. When we discuss the concept of priority based scheduling algorithm, this phenomenon of swapping out and swapping in, this phenomenon is called, with respect to relative terms, those are swapped, roll out and roll in. Means roll out means swapped out, roll in means swapped in. Okay, but roll in, roll out are called in priority based systems. Then major part of swap time is transfer time. Okay, when we say what is swap time means swapping out something and then swapping in something. The time incurred in this whole process is the swap time. So swap time means what? You are transferring something from here to there and there to here. So it is composed of transfer time only, and this transfer time is directly proportional to the amount of memory. So if the memory that you want to make free is more, then swap time will be more because you need to swap out more processes or the process of large size. So you need to swap in process again, how much memory size process or how many processes you are trying to swap in. Your transfer time will depend on these criteria. Okay, so I think this point is quite clear and it is simple. More data to transfer, though obviously you need more data transfer time. Now there is a concept of memory allocation. 2 minutes over already, so just give me 2-3 more minutes. I will finish this, okay? Else it will remain pending. So in memory allocation, we have two types of allocation: static memory allocation and dynamic memory allocation. Like static memory, we had the concept of static memory, static linking and static loading, and dynamic linking and dynamic loading. So static memory allocation means what? The things those are already allocated by compiler. And if something is not done by compiler, means that will be done at runtime. So static means compile time doesn't matter whether linking, loading, or allocation. Similarly, dynamic means at runtime doesn't matter linking, loading, or allocation. So here, the exact size and type of memory must be known at compile time, means a priori, in advance. But if that is not the case, then you have to do the dynamic memory allocation. Now this memory allocation is done at runtime, and the point is that to do it, we need to use the concept of pointers, because ultimately you need to do the context switches. You need to jump from one memory location to another. Now dynamic memory location, when we discussed the concept of process, then if you remember correctly, then we discussed the concept of heap. Heap is the data structure that is used for dynamic memory allocation. Like you use the concept of malloc. Malloc function is there in C. Okay, so that is to provide you the heap space. Doesn't matter how much space do you need, but that is fetched from heap with the help of those functions. Now the concept of heap and stack both is present in your PCB. So with respect to each process, there is some heap area and there is some stack area. Stack holds the temporary variables. Heap manages the dynamic memory allocation. So when we do the dynamic memory allocation, heap comes into picture. Then dependency of the operating system becomes higher because there are different sorts of possible algorithms. Those are supposed to be responsible, okay, for your heap memory allocation. Depending on your memory allocation algorithm, your respective memory will get allocated to the respective process. But it will depend on your OS type, which type of OS you are using, because different OS, different allocation policies or algorithms are used. Now there are majorly two types of allocation, memory allocation. One is single partition allocation, second is multi-partition allocation. Single partition allocation assumes that your memory is a single chunk of available memory, free memory locations. Okay, so if it is a single chunk, then obviously there is a simple concept of relocation register only. There is no other concept, because what we saw in the logical to physical address mapping, that there is a logical address, there is a physical address, there is a relocation address. So relocation address is just considering that there is a base value. You just simply add the logical address value to base value and just compare with the limit value. And if it's right, then allow to access the physical memory. So here, the relocation scheme is used to protect the user processes from each other. How to protect? We have already seen with the help of base value comparison and base plus limit value comparison. Okay. And the relocation register contains the value of smallest physical address. Why smallest physical address? Because we are considering the single partition. Single partition means what? There are no multiple partitions. There is single partition means single base value. If there is single base value, there is a single relocation register value that is of smallest physical address, means the starting address of your single partition. Now the limit register value will contain the range of all logical addresses. And what will be the base plus limit? It will be the end address of your single partition. Because it is base, it is end. So it is your limit, total limit. Now in multi-partition algorithm, in multi-partition allocation, you will divide this single allocation into multiple parts. So single partition will get divided into multiple partitions. So here the concept of whole will come into picture. Whole means what? Whole means earlier it was a single memory. Now you have divided into multiple memory locations. So there might be some free memory locations out of some filled memory location. Okay. So suppose you showed a program in RAM, then you dynamically swapped out some of its components to disk. Okay. So in between, there became some holes. Now those holes are available, but you can use it or you can't use it. It will depend on the allocation policy. Allocation policy means what? When a process comes into system, it will look for a suitable hole that is sufficient in size to hold this whole process or the component. Okay. So whenever some process comes, means when some process is swapped in to memory, your RAM, then you need to find a suitable hole that is capable to hold the whole process. Now, when the process will come, you will find the sufficiently large hole to accommodate it. And operating system will maintain the information of both things, the available holes and the allotted partitions. So if you add the allotted partitions and the free partitions, means that is your total memory locations. Because total memory locations, all the memory locations will be either empty, means holes, or allocated or filled. Okay. So multi-dynamic storage allocation problem. Dynamic storage allocation means your multi. There is no single memory allocation. There is multi-partition allocation. So in case of multi-partition, we will do the dynamic storage allocation. Because dynamic storage allocation, when you will do, then there might be the holes at the different locations, but you don't have the sufficient space in total in contiguous memory locations to hold the process intact. Now, point is that if there are holes and you are trying to store a particular process, why you are not able to store a particular process, that we will see in next lecture in the form of fragmentation. Okay, but point is, suppose your process is there and the holes are also available. Holes means free locations. Okay, free locations are there. Your process is there. So you need to store your process at the one of the free locations. So there are three choices. Either you search the first fit algorithm, or you choose the best fit algorithm, or you choose the worst fit. First fit means what? Allocate the first hole that is big enough, means that is sufficient to hold the memory. That is sufficient to hold the process. Okay, with respect to its memory requirements. Best fit means what? Allocate the smallest hole that is big enough. Means, for example, your process size is 200 MB and the hole size, there are three holes in the memory, one of 50 MB, one of 250 MB, and one of 220 MB. Okay, so 220 MB. Okay, you have a meeting. Okay.
Yes, Professor. Like they're discussing the 4th years, the divisional chairs. Yeah.
Okay, fine. So we'll discuss this last slide in next lecture. Okay.
Okay, Professor.
Okay, fine.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Professor.
Thanks.